Good afternoon. Welcome to the Public Services Committee meeting. The meeting will start in 60 seconds.
Call this meeting of the Public Services Committee Tuesday, January 8th into order. The first item on the agenda will be a review and approval of minutes dated December 11th, 2012.
Move to approve, Erpenbach.
Second, Aguilar.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, then the first item on our agenda today is Project Trim. We will have Don Kearney start with us on that, please.
Good afternoon, City Council members, Public Service Committee. Appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit more about Project Trim. I think the conversation's been good so far, and the more we can do to try to get the information out about how the program works, I think the better off everybody will be. I wanted to start a little bit, and obviously we want to engage the council on any questions you might have about the materials that we handed out, the letter, the door hanger, and then the other educational brochures that we provided to the council, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. But before we answer questions about the information we provided to you, we kind of wanted to give you an overview of the Project Trim program, and just remind everybody that current city ordinance places the maintenance responsibility for street trees on the abutting property owner, and we're able to do that through our powers granted by state law. One of the things that I think that's been brought up in the past is that the city does not require property owners to plant trees in the boulevards. It's not in the residential areas. It's just not something that we require them to do. And so I think there's a perception that because we have a program that identifies recommended trees that we suggest that you plant in the street boulevard, we're not requiring that take place. The other thing is that from our perspective, we think the program works really well from a code enforcement standpoint. You know, over the 4-year average, we've got a 97% compliance rate. And prior to starting this program, we had about 700 complaints a year from low-hanging branches over streets and sidewalks. Over this past year, that number's down to 121 complaints. So we've made some significant progress since the project was initiated. The other thing is that I think there's been some interest in knowing what it would cost for us to take over the program and keep trees in compliance with city ordinance. And we've done some figuring in cooperation with our finance department, and we anticipate that the Project Trim enforcement for us to do it or for our contractor to do it would more than double our entire forestry budget for the city. The other thing is that based on what we've put together, it would really only address ordinance heights. And what I mean by that is that typically if a property owner has to trim some trees or wants some trees trimmed to be in compliance with the ordinance, the arborist is probably going to also trim the balance of the tree so that if there's dead wood in it or if there are other issues as far as pruning goes, they would probably take care of those at that same time. Whereas if we were to do it or a contractor were to do it, they would just go out and just trim off that branch or whatever it might be that's not in compliance with city ordinance. So it would be just a partial trimming of those trees as we contemplated what it would take for us to do that. The other thing is that from our experience is that there are a certain percentage of property owners that would rather trim their own trees. They would rather the city not touch their trees, so to speak. And I think some of them have a sentimental connection to those trees. We hear folks planting them on their child's birthday, anniversaries, whatever it might be, memorial trees, to honor loved ones, and they really take a special ownership in that. And so we anticipate a certain amount of pushback from some property owners that say, you know, I really don't want you to trim my trees, and we think that could be a potential conflict. And so for those reasons, we're really not recommended that we pursue that approach. We really think the cost alone is a significant factor. And then we just think overall, I think if there are things that we can do to continue to improve the program, certainly we'd like to entertain those ideas. But at this point, we do not recommend it. And then also just a reminder that we do have free branch drop-off sites and landfill passes that are provided on an annual basis to assist property owners with the removal of any trimming they may be doing. And so with that, I just wanted to give you an overview of where we were at as far as the staff position and the current program and the facts behind the current program. And with that, we'd be glad to answer any questions.
Questions from the committee? Constable Aguilar.
Don, I'm kind of confused, and that's not your fault, but we've gotten 3 different compliance rate numbers. In an email we received, it was 92%. Last month, when Kelby gave his presentation, it was 96%. And today it's 97%. Can you explain why? The difference in the numbers for compliance?
The number that I gave you today was a 4-year average, as I understand it, but I don't know if Dwayne has any other information to share beyond that.
We just completed a section, so we just rolled up.
Yeah, based on the most recent information, the collective average of those years has rolled up to 97%.
So the other numbers were not over the same period of time? The 92% in Kelby's December 31st email, and that was 92% in his email. Well, I was just...
You have something, Dave?
Good afternoon, Dave Fisher with Parks and Recreation. We do the project trim in sections, and once we finish a section, those new statistics are wrapped into the historical numbers. So every time we finish one section, that number changes a little bit. That's the most current one.
Can I ask?
Please.
From what I took from the presentation last month was that it's done 4 times a year, or am I wrong about that? Or do you just do one section every year?
Yeah, there's one, I'll call it district. We have the city divided into districts. Within that district, then, we do one district every year. Now, the way we approach that is we take each district and we divide it into sections. We do one section at a time, and then by the end of the year, we've completed the district. So every time we get done with one of those sections, then those numbers all roll up again.
Please.
Can I ask one more? So depending on the time that section is done, does it make a difference if the trees are fully leaved at that point? I mean, is there a difference? Do you do it by the branch or by the way that it looks? Because what they said is that they have they drive down the street and they have the things set at the proper height. Well, wouldn't it make a difference if there were leaves on the trees or not, or no?
Well, it can, and, but basically what they're doing is they're looking for that relatively major infraction. I mean, if there's leaves that are touching it, we're not going to mark that. Although the next time around, we probably will. It's actually the branch.
Okay.
On a rainy day when they're wet, they'll hang down too, and so there's a little bit of judgment that has to go into that. So, but we try to get just the branch.
Thank you.
Councilman Karski.
Don, you had mentioned a couple of things that kind of piqued my interest. We send out a notice when we go around the town and say, hey, your trees are out of compliance. And you had mentioned the free pass for the drop-off. Have we ever thought about including pass along with that notice. And the reason I ask this question is, I think for most people it's a logistical problem. You need the equipment, you need a vehicle to haul tree branches, and you know they look at it and it's just too big of a job. And just to get them in a car or a trailer or a truck or whatever, or maybe even we do the clean and green every year, something like that, where if we're going to hit a district where we tell people pile up the branches and we'll come and pick them up this weekend. Have we ever considered anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of, but we do try to remind people that of the branch drop-off sites and the free landfill fill pass that they do get. But it's certainly something we could visit with Public Works about to see if that's something that's a possibility, to try to assist people with greater access to the landfill, potentially. Because the landfill pass, I believe, is only good till June 1st, if I remember right. So something after that, you know, that may be a consideration we could look at and talk to Public Works about.
Any other questions from the committee? I have a couple. Don, let's talk about this letter that's issued out to the property owner. And basically, in here, crews surveyed your neighborhood during the week of and found at least one tree or shrub located at, and then it lists the property address that does not comply with the ordinance and needs to be trimmed. Then in a red parentheses, it says, note the survey did not identify which tree or how many trees need trimming. Is there some way we can change that to where it is actually giving a description of where the trees are located that are in violation? Because that's what I'm hearing from a lot of citizens.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and it's a question we get quite often as far as follow-up calls saying, well, which tree is out of compliance? Well, you know, I personally had questions about that when I first arrived in Sioux Falls, and I said, guys, you got to take me on a ride. I've received an occasional call. People were concerned about it, and it's really how we do the inspection program that's very efficient, that allows us to cover a large segment of the town. I mean, thousands and thousands of different property owners. And if we have to physically get out, or if we have to physically note or mark which tree it would significantly increase the amount of time that's involved in the inspection side of it. And so that's really the challenge that we deal with, because right now we drive the streets, and the truck that we drive it in is of a height that we can tell whether the tree's out of compliance over the streets, and obviously we're able to look at the over the sidewalk as well. And so it's possible is the answer to your question, but it would significantly increase the amount of time that's involved in either marking the tree that might be out of compliance, or you know, noting that on a form or whatever it might be. But it is possible.
If I could just go down that path just a little bit farther.
Sure.
Because, and maybe I'm picturing this wrong, but my understanding is they're driving like a cherry picker down the street. It's set at 11 feet 6 inches. And so they can tell if it's coming close to that 12-foot line. So either we put somebody in that bucket while it's moving, or we stop the truck and he jumps out and goes and paints something on that tree that he knows now from the measuring, right? Number one, you're painting on my tree that I planted along the street, you know, as the homeowner. And number two, that paint isn't going to go away in 4 years when they come around again. If I get another letter, well, is it the same tree? I can't make that, and so I'm not sure I understand how we would do that better. Maybe there's smarter people than me that could figure this out, but I just can't figure out how we would make that process better without taking a ton of time and creating all kinds of issues.
I guess to continue that discussion then, right now, Don, do we have 2 people in the truck when we're doing the surveys?
We do.
Okay, so there's the person that is riding in the truck, not driving, cannot write down, you know, address, because we're definitely going to have to know the address of the property.
Sure.
And they can't tell where the trees are located in the property, so they can add that to the letter. I guess that's my problem with it, is we have two people in a truck driving around in a section of the city, and that's what they're doing. They're driving around, they're saying, okay, well, that address, this address, and then we send out a letter. To me,
So they
this
could
isn't
say-
customer service.
So they could say, oh, it's the third tree from the south, or something like that.
It's your problem now. And to me, that's not good customer service. Good customer service would state that you have two trees in your front yard that need trimming that are located in, you know, the boulevard or in your front yard, you know, wherever they are. It's an easy change on a letter. It's not an extensive time period that people have to be outside of a truck. Councilman Aguilar?
Well, I think, don't we do that, give a more definite location when we have dead trees that we're identifying? Because I did receive one of those letters too, but it had gone mistakenly to my address. But I think it identified my oak tree in the backyard, and I thought, oh my goodness, is it dead? And it was full of leaves and whatever, so I was a little bit upset. But that identified, I mean, I knew which tree to go look at.
Yeah, in the case of the dead or diseased or dying trees, we actually physically do get out and actually mark it on the property.
It wasn't marked. I just received the letter. It wasn't, my tree was not marked. And so I don't see a whole lot of difference, you know, in defining which tree it is, if they can do it for dead trees.
If I might, is that a different program, though? Project Trim is a program for street trees. Yeah. The Dead and Diseased program is a different program.
But it's the same staff that are doing it.
Yeah. Maybe I could have Dwayne or Kelby maybe help address exactly how that works.
Though. I mean, it's not the same budget line items.
It's a separate program.
You know, to me, we're mixing things up. We're supposed to be talking about Project Trim.
Right, and I agree with that, but I still see this as along the same line. It goes back to how we're serving, you know, the community and our citizens. And I had no idea which of my trees I were supposed to trim. And even my arborist, you know, wasn't too sure which one they were getting at. So, you know, there just has to be a better way, is what I guess I'm getting at.
Kelby?
Hi, Kelby Maris with Parks and Recreation. To try to shed just a little more light on it, as we're doing the survey, the second person in the truck is not writing down addresses, they're checking them off. We have a list of addresses with a box next to the address, so as we drive down, it's 4600 is out of compliance, 4604 is okay, 4606 is out. So it's real quick. It's check, check, check. So they're not going at such a pace where they could say, well, tree to the left side of the driveway is out, tree to the right side of the driveway is okay. So it's a whole lot faster, and as Don mentioned, getting to that level of detail would significantly slow down the inspection. In 2012, there were about 3,000 trees, or 3,000 properties in which there were trees out of compliance through Project Trim. And that's just doing 1/5 of the city. Our dead and diseased survey encompasses the entire city every year, and there's about 100 dead private trees every year. So in that comparison, it becomes a numbers thing. Those 100 trees throughout the whole city is one thing, and the 3,000 is something else.
Could you tell us, Kelby, who actually does the Dead and Dying Trees program then? Is it done by the same people, or is it done by different parts of the Parks Department?
It's done by the forestry crew as well. They're the employees with the expertise.
Okay. Councilman Karski?
I'm going to take an opposing view on this. I have 2 trees in my front yard, and they're not on the boulevard, but they do reach the street and the sidewalk. I know that they have to be 16 feet over the street and 12 feet over the sidewalk, I believe are the numbers. And regardless, if they're close and I got a note, I'm going to trim them up. I mean, if this one's 12 and a half feet, it's probably too close, so I'm going to get it trimmed up. I don't know, I guess I'm trying to figure out why we're making such a big deal out of identifying which tree. If you have trees and they need trimming, and they're that close, you probably should be taking care of them.
Councilwoman Aguilar.
Well, I would agree with that, except that, you know, you have to be able to identify. I mean, I look at this like it's a program, it's an ordinance, and I mean, would we allow one of our policemen to stop someone with as ambiguous of a tactic as what's happening here? I mean, if there wasn't, I just think that the service can be improved. And I think that it can be, I'm not sure how, but I think that if you can do it for dead trees, you can do something that will make it more consumer friendly. You know, and if you look at this, there is a possibility that staff will be going out 3 times. They'll go out for the initial assessment, and then they'll go back to see if they've met the requirement, and then if they haven't, you're sending out another crew. So I don't even know if I think that this is cost effective. I just think that there has to be a way to make this, because it is necessary to keep, you know, Project Trim itself is a good program as far as what it does for the city as a whole. But I just think there's got to be a better way as far as serving our constituents.
Councilman Karski.
On the 3% that we haven't had compliance on in the last 4 or 5 years, before we send an arborist out, do we go back the second time? And I've seen photos where we've done assessments and that type of thing. Do we go back and inspect those and let those people know, hey, this is the one, you still are not in compliance?
Yes, that 3% is the number of trees that are trimmed by the city. Mm-hmm. So the 97% represents all of the properties that were brought into compliance by somebody other than the city, whether they did it themselves or hired an arborist.
So before we're, you know, to use the police analogy, before we're slapping them with any sort of fine, we are documenting very well that this is the tree that's not in compliance. Is that correct?
Right. After they get the letter, when we come back and do our re-inspection, that's the blue note that we talked about before that they get that's in the door, that then provides a whole lot more information to them as far as which tree is out of compliance with the ordinance. And that's where we get to, it's the tree to the right of the driveway, or it's the second one from the fire hydrant, or something like that.
So the first time, you have a tree that's out, the second time it's this tree. That's what you're telling me.
Yep. Okay. Regardless of whether they've done any trimming or not, the blue note is on our second time around.
Councilperson Herfenbach.
Just a reminder, this has been city ordinance since the 1950s, and prior to Project Trim, which is really just a customer service thing, where we got tired of, I assume city employees got tired of hearing the complaints, you know, hundreds of them. They started doing Project Trim just to remind folks, you know, when people are walking by your house, they're getting slapped in the face by the branches that are too close to the sidewalk. That's all this is about. It's just a service to folks that are using our sidewalks and using our streets. It has been ordinance for however many years. Let's focus on the 97% that have figured it out, understand how to trim a tree, understand how to keep their own little forest healthy, because trimming is part of keeping your trees healthy. And let's focus on the 97%. And you know what, if I really can't figure it out, they're going to come out there and they'll show me. And I bet Dwayne would stand up there and show me exactly where to make the cut if I'm going to do the cut myself. So let's give staff a break here and let's move on. This is too much on something that 97% of people are getting it.
Kelvy, can I ask one more question on this letter? On this, could we not maybe like put in even a check box that will say, you know, one could say boulevard, one could say your front yard, you know, check your trees in, the offending trees are in this section. And, you know, that way, and do that on the form that the second person is filling out in the truck. He could just check mark it, you know, the offending tree is in the boulevard, or in the front yard, or something like that, that would give your group more information to put in the letter.
We can definitely have that conversation. I do know that sometimes, especially in the older parts of town where there's large trees in the boulevard and on private property, and as they both grow over the sidewalk, as we're driving down the street, sometimes it's difficult to tell which one. It could be both that are out of compliance, but we can definitely have that conversations with our inspection crews.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Any suggestions or motions?
Counselor? I guess I would just say it's been informative, it's been interesting, and I think we have a very solid program, and I think the information has been valuable, and I think if we need to discuss it again, that's the purpose of this committee right here. But for right now, I'm fine with the way things are.
I would agree.
Councilperson?
Well, I guess I'm going to be the naysayer. I just think that there's got to be a way that this can be improved, and I would ask city staff to really take a look at how we can better serve the citizens with this program. I agree, it has been in law, but how many laws do we have or ordinances in place where it is all by citizen complaint? And these people are fined. And so we're saying, okay, well, with this program, we're not going to care about that. I mean, because it makes it a nicer community probably to have the trees trimmed. But there's inconsistency here. So I would ask the park department, that division, to see if there is a way that, for one thing, we can bring down cost. $150 for some of our elderly people is a lot of money. And a way that we can make this a more citizen-friendly program.
Don?
Yeah, I appreciate those comments, Councilmember Aguilar. We have made changes to the program over the last 4 or 5 years to make the letter read clearer. We've had other people read the letter for us to see if there's something confusing about the letter that we're not seeing. But I hear what you're saying. We're always wanting to make whatever process we have better. If we can do that, we're certainly going to go to work and evaluate it again. If there's something that we can do to make it easier for people to understand which tree they need to be trimming, there's another measure that we can take that doesn't physically end up bogging down the inspection process. We'd be glad to take a look at that. And so I appreciate your time today and know that we'll continue to try to refine it and make it better.
Don, I have one more question, if I could. Just on the options that were given to us as far as if the city was going to do it or if a contractor was. On the startup cost here for option 1 for trimming done by city crews, we came up with $908,600. Is that citywide or is that just for a section?
That would be a per year cost, the one-time startup cost, and then after that there wouldn't be that annual cost. It would be just a one-time startup cost for us to get enough equipment to be able to do the work.
Yeah. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay. With that, we will go to the next agenda item, which will be the taxicab ordinance. We'll have a presentation by Jim David, our legislative operations manager. Basically, the background on this, if I'm privileged to do, is this was brought back to Public Services because of some complaints that I had and on the growth of taxi services in Sioux Falls, and that some of the cab companies or drivers were not using our regulations or utilizing those rules fairly. So what I wanted to do is do a recap of the ordinance that oversees the cab companies, and then discuss further needs and issues that are going on now. Jim, if you would, please.
Thank you, Councilor Anderson. members of the committee, this presentation will include what the current ordinance says, but it will also look at other cities across the Midwest, 3 in particular: Lincoln, Nebraska, St. Paul, Minnesota, and Des Moines, Iowa. Chapter 124 is the governing ordinance that actually regulates vehicles for hire. It's not only taxicabs, but it's also buses, it's livery vehicles, wheelchair transports, many other type of vehicles that actually do this type of work. But a taxicab is also defined as a motor vehicle that carries passengers, not less than 7 individuals. It does not have a definite route, and it accepts passengers for hire. Councilor Anderson had talked a little bit about the growth in cabs in the City of Sioux Falls. I have 2 separate numbers. The first one in yellow is the number of companies. You'll see that it has tripled since 2006. And then I looked at the number of owners in the taxicab industry, and that has actually increased by 5 times since 2006. An interesting side note, for the total number of taxicabs in Sioux Falls, 8 of the 18 are brand new. So that means that 7 had dropped off, and additional 8 had occurred between 2011 and 2012. 124 requires inspections of the actual vehicles, and it requires that those inspections be periodic, and the inspections can be done by a mechanic or the owner of that taxicab company. It's required once every 3 months or 3,000 miles, whichever occurs first. And the records of those inspections, the deficiencies and the corrections that are made, are to be kept by that owner, and these records are supposed to be open to the city for inspection at any time. This is an example of the form that is filled out for those vehicle inspections. You'll see here that includes the type of vehicle, the person's name, and also what has been looked at: headlights, horns, washer fluid, mirrors, things of that nature, brakes, belts. Some of the omissions that maybe could be added, of course, are seat belts. That is also not included in this form. It does have a place for a mechanic's name, but not a mechanic's signature, but also has an opportunity for an operator or the owner of the vehicle company to sign. 124 also states the taxicab rates. It only has a maximum fare for 5 or less passengers at $2.60 for the first 1/10 of a mile. For each succeeding 1/9 of a mile, it requires 35 cents. There is a contradiction in the ordinance. Right now it has the maximum fare is based on 5 passengers or less, but a taxicab is defined as 7 passengers or less. There's an additional surcharge of 10 cents per trip for every increase of 15 cents in the price of gasoline, and that is currently at $1.30 according to the planning department. If the price of gasoline is reduced, the surcharge should also be reduced. Documentation justifying the increase is also to be provided to the city planning office. 124 also discusses taximeters. This is a device that's pictured here. It automatically records the distance traveled and the fare that is payable. Ordinance requires that a taxi have a taximeter, which is visible to the passenger. The taximeter also must be equipped with a flag, which is hit when a taxi begins to charge a customer. It also prohibits the unlawful use of the flag. Licenses are required for anyone wishing to be a taxicab in Sioux Falls. This is an example of that license application. It includes a business address. It includes what type of a vehicle for hire you are, a taxi, a limousine. It includes the applicant's name, of course, is the contact person, the location, previous experience in motor vehicle transportation business, and a general statement of reasons supporting the granting of the application. There's also insurance requirement in the ordinance. It states that there has to be a general liability of $1 million for bodily injury, and also a liability of $500,000 for bodily injury and property damage. There's a 30-day notice that's required to give to the licensing specialist for any changes in the insurance, and liability insurance or bond shall be approved by the licensing specialist prior to the issuance of the license. Revocation is also in the hands of the licensing specialist. She may revoke the license or suspend that license for any violation of the city ordinance or state law. And there's also an administrative appeal process, and anybody that has been suspended or revoked is sent certified. The ordinance also looks at drivers. Each applicant should be 18 years or older, be able to read and write English, not addicted to the use of intoxicating liquors or drugs, and has to make a sworn statement that their personal information or personal information, whether they've been convicted of a felony or misdemeanor, where their previous locations of residence have been, and whether they've ever had their license revoked. The license, this application is actually investigated by the police department or the police chief. It was discussed a little bit earlier, but there is a carrier license that's issued by the Department of Revenue. The license entitles the licensee to serve alcohol in their vehicle. This license is required for anybody that wishes to do this, and there's a $100 fee for this carrier license. As I said earlier, we looked at 3 communities in the Midwest. The first one we're going to look at is Nebraska, or Lincoln, Nebraska. In this case, the state of Nebraska actually issues the taxicab license or certificate and limits the number of how many can operate in a city. The taxicab rates are submitted by the taxicab company, but are approved by the Public Service Commission. Lincoln Ordinance also does regulate further taxicabs, and there are some differing ordinances. For example, it includes a medical examination by a licensed physician upon the hiring of any driver, and it should be done 3 years after. No established medical history of disease for these drivers, including diabetes that requires insulin, cardiovascular, coronary, epilepsy, no mental or nervous or psychiatric disorder likely to interfere with the driving. There's a hearing and eyesight test. They cannot use amphetamines, narcotic or other habit-forming drugs, and there's no current diagnosis of alcoholism. Lincoln further requires that if a driver is considered unqualified, if it has been convicted of a felony in the last 10 years, or they've been released from parole or probation for that same time period. They also do not allow a driver who has had a misdemeanor charge in the last 10 years of sexual assault, contact, or indecent exposure, 2 or more convictions of theft or crimes of dishonesty, a DUI, motor vehicle homicide, or driving on a suspended license. St. Paul, Minnesota has initial and periodic and annual vehicle inspections done by their city garage, and also includes looking at their tires, their brakes, their electrical system, their steering, their wheel alignment, engine, transmission, drivetrain, and frame. Looks at defects that must be corrected to the vehicle before licensing. Seat belts and window raising and lowering must also be in working order. It regulates taximeters. Taximeters are inspected for good working condition and are sealed. Taxicabs may not be operated if a taximeter is out of order. It must be inspected by the city prior to use, and then the city will seal that taximeter. Tampering with the taximeter is prohibited. It also prohibits deceit of direct routes. It requires that the taxi driver take the direct and most shortest route. A sign with a rate of fare must be placed conspicuously for the passenger, and receipts are available upon request by the customer. There's similar background checks requirements as Lincoln, Nebraska, and there's even a taxicab training course that is required. Looking at Des Moines, it disqualifies any vehicle more than 10 years of age. A taximeter is subject to inspection by the city periodically or on a complaint basis. Des Moines actually sets a minimum taxi rate fare, or taxi fare rate. It requires a rate card that is placed conspicuously for the passenger and allows a taxicab driver to demand payment in advance and may refuse a passenger unless they do prepay. Failure to pay a taxicab is guilty of a misdemeanor. Des Moines also forbids a driver from transporting more passengers than the manufacturer allows, prohibits the refusal of orderly passengers, forbids the sale of alcohol, forbids the use of alcohol, narcotic, sedative, barbiturates, marijuana, or other drug or substance that may impair the driver, and it prohibits driving more than 16 continuous hours in a 24-hour time period. Insurance requirements, Sioux Falls requires a general liability of $1 million for bodily injury and $500,000 for auto liability. St. Paul requires auto liability of $100,000 or $300,000 for multiple individuals and $100,000 property damage. Lincoln, each taxi cab shall have a liability coverage of $500,000 at any time of one accident. And Des Moines requires a commercial general liability insurance, which will cover bodily injury, death, and property damage with limits of liability of not less than $750,000 per occurrence. The automobile liability insurance shall include coverage for bodily injury, death, and property damage with limits of liability of not less than $750,000 per occurrence. This is an example of the current rates and fares of these communities. As I said earlier, Lincoln does not have a set maximum or minimum fare. Sioux Falls, if one person was going to take a 10-mile trip at night, it would cost $35.40. In Des Moines, it's going to cost $25.30. And in St. Paul, Minnesota, who just recently raised their fare rates, it's $29.70. Happy to entertain any questions.
Councilman Karski.
Jim, that last screen you showed, those were the maximum, based on maximum fares, correct?
That is correct.
There is no minimum.
There is no minimum except for Des Moines.
Okay. I guess I have a question for Jamie Palmer, our licensing specialist.
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening. Your role as licensing specialist gives you the authority to revoke cab licenses. I wasn't aware of that. It seems like a lot of authority for your position. Have you ever come into a situation where you've had to consider that?
No, I haven't, not yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilwoman?
You know, we do have the previous licensing specialist in the room. She might be able to set some, Lori, could you speak to that?
Lori Hogstead, City Clerk, former licensing specialist. I did at one time revoke a license, and that was because the owner did not have updated insurance, and in making numerous calls, I still did not receive it. And finally, the insurance agent just called me and said, I cannot get the person in to pay. They no longer have insurance. So by ordinance, I could no longer allow that person to be licensed. So that would be the situation. It wouldn't be, you know, it'd have to be something where they did not comply with the ordinance would be the reason to revoke, not, you know, anything else that gets more involved. And we did have a case that was a little bit more involved, and that went through the court system. Otherwise, our discretion is simply based on the ordinance.
Any other questions from the committee? Lori, before you leave, I have a couple questions. Okay. Let's talk about the inspection process that is done to ensure that our cabs are operating safely in Sioux Falls.
Counselor, could you ask these, though, of the current licensing specialist, of Jamie?
Sure.
Out of respect for her position.
Thank you. Jamie, with the inspection process that we utilize to inspect cabs right now, what department is responsible for following up and making sure that these cabs are operating safely and responsibly?
Well, currently at renewal time or anytime a new cab company comes in and wants to apply for a license, they are required to submit the inspection form with their application for all of their vehicles. They are also by ordinance required to keep or continue to do those every 3 months or 3,000 miles, whichever comes first. They don't necessarily have to turn them in to our office, but they have to keep them available for inspection in case we ask for them.
And do we do any, right now we have, like the police department does liquor stings on different locations, and our liquor stores, convenience stores, things like that sell liquor. Do we have anyone who goes out and does checkups on our cab companies?
Not to my knowledge. I really haven't had to do, like I said, I haven't had to pursue the revocation process or anything like that. I do get some complaints that I try to follow up on my own if it's something I can resolve by calling the current owner. You know, sometimes it's just a confusion or miscommunication. However, I know from what Lori's training in the past, she had said that if a complaint comes in that is maybe questionable, if it's breaking an ordinance, to contact the police department and see if they can assist in trying to figure out if there is a valid, you know, valid thing that they're breaking the ordinance. So.
Okay, thank you.
I like your idea about stings, though. We don't have anybody to do it, is what she's saying, but it would be interesting to have, you know, have like spot inspections or whatever. We don't have any of that going on, right?
That's about the range I'm going down right now, is that is something in our, with Mr. David and I looking into this, we found that there is no department actually responsible for just doing spot checks. You know, just making sure that the ordinance is being enforced, and that the safety of our cabs in our city are at a level that, you know, they have been in the past.
Could I ask a question of Jamie then, again?
Please.
Jamie, sorry. While you're walking up, I'll ask it. So if I come in and I want to start a cab company, I need a license from you. Do you come look at my car? Do you do anything, or you just trust me? I've filled out the form and I've given you an inspection sheet and I'm good to go.
I do take their word for it. I don't go out and inspect any vehicles. Now, however, I one time, and I can't remember the cab company, but I got an inspection form, and I don't know, something about it just didn't sit right with me for some reason, and so I asked them who they had do it, and I called that company and asked them to send me an email verifying that they had inspected the cab, and it was a garage, and they verified that they did do it. I think it's because they hadn't signed it, they hadn't put their name on it, is why I raised a flag for me. So I don't do that all of the time. You know, if I kind of look at it and make sure everything's checked and that the garage has put their company name on it and stuff. But other than that, no, I don't.
But to be fair, you're not required to. The ordinance does not require you to make any sort of inspection. It is only to check that the form is filled out properly.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And to continue that line too, Jamie, with the meters within the cabs, how are they monitored? Who installs them, and, you know, how do we follow up making sure seals aren't broken or anything like that? We don't have anybody to inspect them either, do we?
We don't, no. In fact, a lot of times they have to research on the internet of even where to get the taximeter that they need to install, and then they need to find somebody to install it and calibrate it. We don't have any hands into that process. So,
thank you. Any other questions from the committee? I'm going to open this up for a little public testimony because I know we do have some cab operators here and also owners. So basically what I'd like to do is open this up for public discussion, and if you'll give your name and just say you live in Sioux Falls, we'd appreciate it.
Alan Olson from Sioux Falls. One of my taxi driver guys I had coffee with, he drove all the way to Indianapolis. We allow those taxi cab drivers drive into Indianapolis and Rapid City to Salem, all over. They do that, but we're just wondering how far they could go, because he said, I missed a wedding anniversary, but this guy paid me so much money, I can't turn it down to the company. And he had drove all the way to Indianapolis and Chicago, delivering it and then deliver it right back.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other owners or public testimony? If you'd come up and state your name, please.
Good evening. Thank you for your time. And my name is Brent Kinsley. I'm co-owner of yellow cab with Natalie Kinsley.
Tally.
We have some concerns about the ordinances and the way they're written, and also with the licensing process. We currently have around 43 employees, probably 35 drivers. We operate 21 cabs, and we have a tax ID number. All our employees are employees. We take tax out, you know, FICA, Social Security, work comp. One of our concerns on the license, going to the licensing first, is that nowhere on the license does it ask for your taxpayer ID number. And also, if there are companies that have multiple drivers, multiple employees, but they might be considered them as subcontractors. So we believe that on the licensing, if these people are working as independent contractors, that each one of them individually have a tax ID number. It also, what that would do is, it would, there's a chance, the way that it is right now, that an independent company hires this guy as an independent contractor, and he just says, you know, you give me $50 for the day and take the car, you know, and you bring it, you know, you got it for 12 hours, and then, you know, you keep whatever you take in and you bring it back with a full tank of gas. However, they have, you know, you can have different agreements, but it's basically, that's how it works. Well, once they pay the $50, you know, any drive they take, you know, during that day, could easily be hidden revenue, you know, like, you know, just put the money, you know, they call them put it in pocket drive, TIP drive. You know, there's no oversight. These, you know, we think that every licensed cab company should have a landline and a business office. And these, you know,
I'd like to speak.
Okay. I just want, you know, when they're working on cell phones, this is another thing that is huge. When they're working with a cell phone, they're not logging, most of them. We've rode with some just to see how they operate, and all of the ones that we checked didn't even log the call. You know, they didn't. You know, in our business, the call comes into the dispatcher on a landline. It's logged on a daily radio log. The time, pickup point, drop-off point, and then the driver who's dispatched to it. All right? And then the driver, in turn, has a driver's daily log. And when he gets a call, he writes down what the dispatcher has told him. And then we can go back and, you know, if for a perfect example is the gentleman, unfortunately, that just was found dead. He happened to ride a taxicab, and he rode a yellow cab. And I was able to tell the police that, yes, he rode from this address to here to there at this time. It was this driver. We had input from the driver of what transpired in the cab, and what, you know. So it's, and that's just one example. Over the 25 years that we've owned the company, it's happened dozens of times where we've helped the police in their investigations, because a lot of people think, you know, you can take a taxi, nobody's paying attention. And the way it is right now in this city, that's the way it is. There are cab companies right now that are operating. They couldn't tell you that,
Or have no record of.
or have no record of how many drives they took, you know, where they went, what time, who took them. You know, there's, so, you know, you basically, it's pretty much a gypsy cab type situation. There, you know, there's, and then, you know, there, if you ever got, you know, audited, you don't have no way to, you know, to show, or, you know, like for us, it's, we use the information to make sure that the drivers are on the up and up, and, but also it's a valuable, and we keep them for 5 years.
Audited, and it was all checked.
Yeah, and it's, and we keep them for 5 years. And so if you want to know, and it happens a lot, lawyers sometimes call, say, yeah, I had this guy, he rode in a cab, he said he rode in a cab, and he's up for criminal charges, and did he ride a cab, and when was it? It was May of 2010. I can go into my archives and find it. If it's been called in to into my dispatch shop, there's always going to be a chance where just somebody flags down a cab driving by, gets in.
Well,
I'll never know about it.
Protocol on that is the driver's supposed to call it in.
They're supposed to call it in.
And then it gets logged.
But sometimes that doesn't always happen. But anyway, go ahead, Tally.
If
Well-
you, excuse me for a moment, could I have you raise the mics up a little bit? We're having a little hard time hearing you in the
Sorry.
background. Thank you.
My concerns, being the CFO and dealing with the finances, that I think that for competition's sake, they're not being subjected to some of the costs by oversight, you know, and for instance, having employee cab drivers is becoming obsolete over the nationwide. You know, most of them are independent. And I did a lot of research on I could recite St. Paul's ordinances to you, you know, so I did a lot of research on this too. And one thing that my concern is that when they're applying for multiple vehicle for hire licenses, it would be safe to assume that there's more than one driver. And if they're employees, it should show work comp insurance to cover the employees. If they're independent, then each independent driver should carry a sales tax ID so that they're licensed to operate a business. And you know, we got to look at the insurance records, and not one of them did I see any work comp. Now, it's very common to have independent contractors, but who's inspecting them? You know, and the other thing is that when you have more than one vehicle, or you apply for more than one vehicle for hire license, each one of those vehicles should be inspected not only for safety, but is there a meter in the car? Do they have the rates listed? You know, and I did ride with several cab. The ones that didn't know me, they do now, though. But I rode with some of them just to see, you know. And for the most part, they were all pretty much. You know, there's a few things. I'm not here trying to point fingers at anybody or anything. My point is just that there are things that can be sidestepped, you know. And so just so that we're all on a fair playing field for the sake of competition, you know, we do the inspections, our car, you know, we do all it, because it used to be just us for a long time. And so we're the ones that are heavily scrutinized, and, you know, and we've kind of set the standards and we've done this. But another concern is that these companies that just have, they're just one man operated and owner, may be putting the city at risk. And when I say that, it's because, for instance, for us, we're insured. We get a complaint on one of our drivers. There's a protocol, there's a chain of command, and there's repercussions. For this one-man operation, that before something bad happens, a person calls to complain. Well, it's just the one person. Nothing gets done. What's their next source? What's their next source of recourse there? I mean, so I would say whoever's issuing the license is going to be liable for whatever happens there. And so those are some of the current concerns that I've come up with, and for competition's sake, they're basically gypsy cabs, and that is a term used in the industry, that there's no overhead except for the insurance they're carrying on the car. And like to go into further about the ordinances in the other cities, they have to, if they're applying for a company license, it's a minimum of 6 vehicle for hire stickers. That constitutes a company. They have to have a facility with 4 walls and a landline, so they're not out in their car on the cell phone. There's no way of tracking any of that. For tax purposes, for safety purposes, you know, there's really no way to, and it's required, as Brent was saying, how we log every call, and the logs have to have a pickup time, how many people were in the car, a pickup address, drop off, you know, everything has to be logged. And even in, like in St. Paul, the ordinances read that even if they're independent, which they all are, the drivers are required to keep those logs and turn them into the cab owners that they're leasing the cab from. And it has to be on record for a minimum of 1 year. And so there's a lot of things in place that I think is being overlooked that we've just always done, but nobody's being required, you know, and I don't think each car is being inspected. For instance, in 2 of the cars that I rode in, their licenses were scotch taped to the inside of the back window. They could be transferred from car to car. They could be, you know, and unless you're up reading the VIN number and all that stuff on the tag, you're not going to know it. So just, you know, there's little things like that they are cost-wise, it's costing them nothing to operate these cabs, and our expenses are huge. We carry work comp on all of our employees, you know, and we do inspect all of our cars, and there's been rumor, I didn't find this, there's a rumor that, oh, this guy's car didn't have a meter in it. Well, he's got 3 or 4 licenses. Do all 3 or 4 cars have that? The one car might be, you know, each license or each vehicle, I feel, should be inspected to see that it's got all the equipment in it that it's supposed to have and licensed properly, and, you know, and that all the insurance is, and this 30-day, I didn't know about this here in Sioux Falls, where you have 30 days to notify if your insurance is lapsed. Is that for the company owner or the insurance company? Do you know?
You know, that's one thing that I think is hugely important, that if there's a way to get something like that written into the ordinance, that your insurance company must know that that you are a commercial vehicle for hire, and, you know, that if your insurance lapses, that they should be required to contact the licensing body to make them aware that this person is no longer insured. To the best of my knowledge, that's not the way it is now.
Yeah, so anyway, that's my concern, is that they are getting by with little to no cost, and it's making it very difficult for us to be able to compete, yet we're the ones that are highly scrutinized, and we're the ones that, you know, have set the standards, and we try to keep those standards, and it's making it very difficult for the sake of competition for us to even, because all these one-man operations have absolutely no overhead, and to cap how many you give out. See, that might make a difference too, because if there's a limit to how many you'll give out, then that helps with the sake. But if there's an unlimited number of them, they could eat us alive, you know, because they have no overhead, and yet we do, you know. So there's a lot of issues there that I think they're getting by a lot cheaper than we are, and I just want everybody to be on the same fair playing field. Is all I'm asking for that.
There's only got one other thing that I'd like to bring up, and it was addressed, and it's the courier beverage permit by the state. I've been in the cab business for 25 years, and I can think of no worse combination than a taxi cab that sells and consumes alcohol. And while I've talked to the licensing gal in Aberdeen, I said, all right, I have basically 21 cars. I have 24 cars, but I run 21. I can buy 21 liquor licenses.
No, you only have to buy one.
I know,
liquor
I can
license.
I'll get 21 liquor licenses for $100. And then I can have my, and this lady says, well, I said, how come a liquor license for an establishment is around $200,000 and I can buy one for $100 and I can get 21 of them? And she says, well, that's because, the vehicle's moving, it's the establishment is the established place, it doesn't move, and well, in the ordinance, you can see that you can charge waiting time and and mileage, and there's no minimum. So, she said, one of her examples was, well, you couldn't go sit at the park or out front of a bar and sell liquor. Well, according to our ordinance, you're for hire as soon as you push the button and the timer's on. You don't have to go nowhere, and you could charge them, and there is no minimum or maximum. Oh, well, there's a maximum amount of waiting time, but you could charge. Say, yeah, jump in. I'll, have a couple drinks, and I'm going to charge you 5 cents an hour. Depending on how much you drink, or you could go to Sid's Liquor or any liquor store, buy a big bunch of booze and then sell it at whatever price you want. You get the right person in the cab. The last thing you want to do is give them another drink, and you could take advantage of, you decide, oh, this guy's all right, I'll sell him for $3, and well, this guy's a jerk, it's $10. And I would also add that when we did test out the service, and we asked for a receipt, and on the receipt, it was the total amount. It was the fare and the booze sales, but the booze sales wasn't listed on there. It's just the full amount. So you have a real big opportunity for fraud and misuse. And I don't know if that could be ordinanced out, because it's a state law. I don't know, but it's possibly the worst idea I've ever heard of in my 25 years.
Well, thank you very much, and for the sake of time, we're going to...
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Please, next.
Oh, pardon me. Todd Slade, Quicksilver Taxi. First, I would like to say I am a one-car owner. Addressing the issue of gypsy cabs, most cab companies that use cell phones can be tracked on the internet and by police. So as for stealing calls or concealing our whereabouts or the things that we do, that's pretty well impossible. I keep immaculate records. I have a 5-star rating on Google. You can check that. I guess I use that to indicate to the people that would get in my car that I am a fairly reputable individual. I keep good records. And let's get into the liquor license things. The worst thing you can do is take their beer away because they become abusive, mouthy, and damage the vehicles. If they can't just take their drink along. Doesn't hurt anything. Driver's sober. I don't see anything wrong with that particular issue. I guess, most of the one-car owners that I know do keep records. I keep mine on a computer. The city is perfectly willing to come and take a look at that anytime any of you want to. I keep track of every single thing I do, and I report it to the state of South Dakota, to the Department of Revenue. I pay my taxes, and anybody wants to check on what I did that night, I'll be happy to surrender my list of things that I have done that day. Again, to recap, you can't go anywhere if you're carrying a cell phone without your whereabouts being able to be checked via the internet, via the police department, and so on. So I guess, I don't know, boo-hoo. this is America. We're just trying to compete. I'm just trying to provide a service. And I would like to continue to do so. I keep all my licenses. In fact, I just bought my my chauffeur's license today. I have my stickers firmly affixed to my windshield. So I guess, you know, let's bring the cars forward and let the city look them over. If it's what they want to do, they're perfectly willing to look my car over. I have my mechanic repair my vehicle regularly, and I know most of these one-car companies do that. Guess that's all I got, and I thank you for your time.
One moment, sir. Do we have any questions from the committee for this gentleman? No? Okay, thank you, sir.
I do have one idea that I would like to discuss after this meeting regarding Wiley's and the parking problem down there. Would that be possible?
We do have a council meeting that starts at 7, but what we'll do is get your information so that we can continue this discussion.
Okay, I have a little diagram. I'll provide that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening. Tom Werner with First Choice Taxi. There has been a lot of discussion as in regards to the liquor license.
Can I ask you to hold for a moment, sir?
Yes.
Folks, this is a discussion, a public discussion on the regulations of cab companies. I would like this to stay a nice discussion, okay? And I don't want any conversations negative in the background, please. Thank you. If you continue, please, sir.
Okay. Like I said, I'm with First Choice Taxi. We are, to my knowledge, the only cab company that is offering liquor for sale in our vehicles. So I figured that I would just come forward and address the issue directly with you. So that way there is no misinterpretation as to what's going on. When we decided to implement that into our business model, it was not done lightly. It was taken over the course of several weeks and several phone call conversations with Carol Logan in the licensing department. And we asked the same questions repeatedly over and over and over again to make sure that we were not going to be violating anything. 90% of our alcohol is sold in the early hours of the evening when people are on their way to the party, not at bar close trying to beat get and go out of a liquor sale. Okay. In regards to what are we doing to protect the public, there is a training program that is from suresellnow.com, which is approved by the South Dakota legislature. It is SDCL code 35-2-10.1. This alcohol training course goes over South Dakota state laws, the ID checking in minors, physical effects of alcohol, alcohol and drugs, absorption factors, indicators of intoxication, managing drinking behavior, and creating a safe environment. This is training that we are implementing by March 1st of this year before the next big drinking holiday of St. Patrick's Day. All of our drivers will be 100% certified in this course. In the month of April, all of our drivers will be certified for CPR and first aid and AED training also. It is not something that is a huge moneymaker for us. It is just to set us apart from the competition, and it's gone over very well. We have multiple people from the airport that are here from Chicago, New York, San Francisco. They love the idea. They've never heard of it before anywhere in the country, and these are people that they travel day in and day out. So that's just kind of my standpoint on this. Some of the other factors that I wanted to bring up, and I'll try to go through this very quickly because I know you're running short on time here. The meter regulation is a big factor. There are some of the bigger companies that once they file for that fuel surcharge, it is not being taken away from the meter, and the meters are just staying higher. Gas prices fluctuate greatly. So if we're going to have any type of meter standardization on that, it's going to be very time consuming. because for an agency to go in and seal the meters and to calibrate those and everything else for the 40, 50 cars that we have licensed for the City of Sioux Falls, that could be difficult, but at the same time, it would be encouraging to get something like that done. We have all of our equipment professionally installed up in Minneapolis, and the shop that we use is one of those certified shops for the City of Minneapolis. So personally, I encourage it. Everybody else that's having, local guys do it, that's up to them. The vehicle inspection, there was a lot of talk by Yellow Cab, and this is not to pick on them directly, but their costs are higher. Well, their costs are higher because that's their choice, okay? It's their choice to have 20-some cars, to have 40 employees, and things like that. The one-man show or the two-car guys should not be penalized for that. I operate 2 cars. It's not my fault that they have 25 cars to pay for, okay? We're trying to do the most reputable job that we can do. The insurance requirements, as far as once a year, drivers are having to prove that they have insurance. It's to my knowledge, through a conversation with Ms. Palmer, that the only notification that our licensing department is getting of insurance changes is if it cancels. So they're not getting any information as far as these big companies that have so many cars. Well, if they're only using 10 of them on a regular basis, and then all of a sudden you got New Year's Eve and they flood the streets with every car that they got, there's no proof that those cars are even on insurance. There's only an insurance card that at one point in time during the year they were on insurance. But what about that night? I think that's being taken advantage of quite a bit. I would like to encourage the council to consider mandatory drug testing. I feel that that's very important. One of the other things that our company has done to keep the taxi business progressing is we are very innovative on the technology side. We operate 2 cars. You can go on our website right now, you can see where those 2 cars are. It has live interactive GPS tracking right on our website. Our customers are aware of that. Our vehicles are identified by an identification number. So if somebody has a problem with vehicle number 17, they could call the police department, they can call anybody they want to. Anybody can go right on our website and see exactly where that vehicle's and the status of that vehicle, whether they're engaged, whether they're sitting empty, things like that. Our bookwork on our side is better than Yellow Cabs. I grew up with Metro Taxi, Citywide. I've worked for some of the bigger companies. A paper-ridden, you can fudge paperwork, okay? The dispatcher can write down all the calls that he wants, but that driver is still ultimately out on the road doing whatever he wants because a radio is not a camera. There's no proof of what they're doing. With our vehicles, all of our dispatching is done by live GPS. So if that police department member wants to call up and say, hey, did you pick somebody up on the 600 block of South Lowell? I could say, yep, we sure did, and here's a GPS trail of exactly where we took them, what speeds we went, and at what time we dropped them off. So I think the comparison that was given by Yellow Cab to some of the smaller companies is very inaccurate because what we are providing is a much higher standard. And I think that gets through my list as quickly as I can.
If I could, yeah. In addition to mandatory drug testing, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your first name.
Tom.
Tom, in addition to mandatory drug testing, what other sorts of things do you see as being needed to be changed in the existing ordinance?
A maximum of number of hours worked, just like a truck driver. There are some of the one-man shows that those guys are out there 16, 20 hours a day. If it's wrong for a truck driver, I think it should be wrong for anybody. If that car needs to be on the road that many hours of the day to service their clientele, then multiple drivers should be encouraged. Mm-hmm. And also, a CDL level physical, I think should be discussed anyways.
Then if I might, one more, Counselor. I just wanted to verify, you say you have 2 cars running, and you, are you one of the drivers then, or do you have other drivers?
We have other drivers that are independent contractors.
They are independent contractors?
Yes, and we have a contract that they sign. They acknowledge that they are not an employee of our company, but they do represent our company, and they have to abide by our mission statement. Now, at the end of the evening, they are turning in all of their records, all of their cash, everything to us. So we have complete control of what is going on. So if somebody has a complaint saying they got overcharged or their credit card got charged twice or something like that, our office, which I answer 99% of the phone calls directly myself over a dispatcher, I can handle anything that comes up directly to them. We've had more compliments of that direct interaction with our customers than an impersonal dispatcher sitting behind a radio.
Thank you.
Questions? Any other questions from the committee? Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, sir.
With this going on a little longer than I thought it would be, I'm going to move that we continue this discussion in the February PCS meeting. Any?
Can I just ask one question?
Sure.
And I don't know who can answer it, but when did the state law go into effect that you could have liquor in the vehicles? And 2010?
Thank you.
Okay. And was the purpose because of limousine services then? Or just, because do we have open container laws?
For the drivers we do, but not for the riders, right?
To be honest, when I found this out, that was one of my major concerns is, aren't we violating maybe some of our vehicle and alcohol ordinances, or maybe even state law on that also. So I did have Jim David is going to look that up and present that in February.
Mr. Chair, if I would just ask that based on our conversation during the informational meeting, we're trying to cancel the February 12th meetings, and that is when this group is scheduled. Would it be okay if this group moved this to the March meeting of this committee? Would that be okay?
Well, we're going to look at maybe rescheduling the February meeting.
Okay.
So that we still have a February meeting. I wanted to leave that open because of this issue.
Thank you.
Specifically, and we also have the International Fire Code also coming on our agenda in February. So I want to make sure that we still continue these discussions for that.
We do have quite a bit of representation from the city attorney's office. Do they have anything that they'd like to shed on it tonight?
I think also on that, with the time limitations that we're looking at right now, we're 15 minutes away from a council meeting. I think that might be something to discuss in the next committee meeting also.
Okay, great.
So with that, I'll be looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, Erpenbach.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And with this, we will continue this discussion in the February PCS meeting. And also, if anyone does need to contact myself or any other of the committee members, our contact information is on siouxfalls.org, or you can contact our clerk's office here by email, by phone. Any suggestions, any type of meetings, we would be open to that. So thank you. This meeting is adjourned.